And as always, I'm joined by my partners, WEEI's John Lyons and John Sapochetti. Gentlemen, good Sunday morning to you on this gray March Sunday. How are you fellas doing today?
Good morning. We were just talking off air. We're only just about 5 weeks or so from the draft itself. So it's coming right around the corner. I feel like we just started these shows a few weeks ago, and we're already just about 5 weeks out from the draft. Lot to get to coming up in our draft preview shows between now and then, and I'm looking forward to it.
Off season is flying, right? The Super Bowl was 6 weeks ago. Feels like it was 6 hours ago, although in some senses feels like it was 6 years ago, the way the Patriots played in that game and were overmatched by the Seattle Seahawks. But yeah, a lot happening right now. The first real heavy phrase of free agency is over, and now there's still some players out there that you might be able to add, but now it's all getting ready for the draft.
Yeah, and of course, there's always going to be speculation this time of year. Of course, we're going through the pro day circuit. We just got through the combine a few weeks ago. Now we're into pro days, and they've really ramped up. Usually, by the time you get to this time of the off season, now you're starting to have 3, 4, 5 pro days a week. And of course, it's this time of year now where you're getting your local pro day. So we had a couple last week. On Thursday, we had Holy Cross's pro day. Not a big turnout. That's one of the smaller groups we've seen in terms of guys working out. Brown opened their brand new indoor facility doing their own pro day. They had 3 guys that worked out: Ty Pezza, Solomon Miller, both receivers, and Elias Archie, who in one of his 40 times was clocked at a 4.29. He is an intriguing local prospect that I think is going to start to get some attention here in the coming weeks. Boston College is hosting their pro day tomorrow, and Bryant, along with URI and several other schools, will be hosting their pro day tomorrow afternoon at 4 p.m. on the campus of Bryan University. UConn hosts their pro day on Tuesday, and UMass is scheduled to have a pro day on Wednesday. So it's pro day season, and of course, as always, New England Football Journal will have as much coverage as we can have for you. You know, we try to find as many freelancers as we can to get out to these things. Myself and Kevin Stone will be at Boston College tomorrow, and I'll be at Bryan tomorrow. So looking forward to that. Always a great time of the year to see the coaches of these programs that we know and we have relationships with, but to also see the players work out and chase their dream, man. Again, you look at somebody like I mentioned, and Elias Archie at Brown the other day, he runs a 4.29. Now, again, there were only 2 scouts there. The Patriots and Titans were the only 2 organizations that had representation there, but that's going to get out. And other teams are going to look at a guy like that who has good length, who is athletic. If he's running a sub 4.340, it doesn't matter that he played at Brown and he's a New England guy. That's going to help him. So we'll get more into the draft. We're going to talk more about our top 5 needs in regards to the Patriots and what they need and what direction they could potentially go in the draft. And then we're really going to dig into the prospects starting next week. One of the things I want to do too is I just want to run through their who they've met with or talked to so far. And I'm going to talk about some of the guys on that list that I'm intrigued by. And, you know, you guys obviously will give me your input on that. But let's start with the conversation that just won't die, and that's A.J. Brown. And now, of course, there are a bunch of smaller outlets reporting this week that the Patriots do have a trade in place with the Eagles for A.J. Brown. Quite frankly, guys, I'm sick and tired of talking about A.J. Brown, okay? Either trade for him or not. It's not going to happen before June 1st. It was never going to happen before June 1st. We've already talked about that. But my opening question to you guys is, do you buy this reporting that they already have a deal in place with Philadelphia? And if so, and again, it's beat the dead horse season, what do you think that deal looks like?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to June 2nd at 12:01 a.m. so we can finally be done with this, right? Like that's look, it feels to me, guys, like they do have a deal in place because we came into the offseason saying, hey, they really could use a high-end option in the passing game. And there were some options there at tight end, but not really. The draft is Kenyon Sadiq and everyone else, John, as you had said off air before we started the show. And then from a receiver perspective, they signed Romeo Doubs, and I like that signing, but I think we largely agree that in a truly good to great offense, he's probably a number 2 receiver. And you look around and you say, okay, there's really no number 1 tight end options out there unless somehow Kenyon Sadiq falls to them, which I don't think is going to happen. And the only real number 1 receiver option out there available is A.J. Brown. So it feels like it is going to come together. And I know we talked about this last week, there's reservations about Do you give up a first-round pick? I mean, that 2027 first-round pick, I think, is going to be really valuable. I don't want to see them give that up. I
Well,
think
and
it
John,
might
not
come
to
to that.
cut you off, I'm glad you brought that up, but Denver traded for Jalen Waddle this week and gave up a
Right.
first. So how much does that also impact this potentially?
And that's an interesting thing because to me, A.J. Brown's a better player than Jalen Waddle, but Waddle is younger. So you have, and it's only like a year difference, but you still have the advantage there. So I feel like the trade compensation for Brown will be kind of similar. So, and like Brown, in some respects, is a distressed asset because he's had frustrations in Philadelphia. He may not want to be there. But in a way, so was Waddle because Miami had a new head coach and they're trying to tear it all down and they got rid of Tua as well. So I think it's actually for different reasons. You could see the packages come out the same. Like if I'm Philly, I see that Jalen Waddle trade and say, okay, if you want A.J. Brown, that's what you have to offer me or more. And we'll see if the Patriots are willing to go there. But I think, again, I think that has an effect on it for sure. Because even though they're not exactly the same, I think you can work out a similar compensation, especially from a Philadelphia perspective.
What the Dolphins did is they got a first and a third from Denver, right, for Jalen Waddle. Now, that first round pick is in this draft, which is number 30. If the Patriots don't make this deal with Philadelphia until after June 1st, and it's done because of financial concerns for the Eagles and Patriots, then you would be giving them a 2027 first round pick, which in theory, unless the Patriots go back to the Super Bowl, will be better for Philadelphia than it would be getting it this year. I'm going to propose something that makes maybe no sense whatsoever, but that's what I'm here for. Do an NBA style trade. Make the deal. You don't announce it till June 2nd, but at the draft, you draft at 31 for Philadelphia, and that player goes to Philadelphia after June 1st. That's one way that
That's
you
not
can get it
going
all
to
through
happen.
this. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not. It's too creative.
Yeah.
It's too off the wall.
Well, it's not creative. It's in the NFL, picks have a lot more value than they do in the NBA, especially first round picks. I don't see that happening. I think I'm not poo-pooing your idea. I just don't see the Patriots going along with that.
Well, I think they would go along with that rather than give up a 2027 first round pick.
I don't think that they're going to give up a first round pick ultimately.
I wonder, yeah, and I do wonder that like the longer they hold out, like if it gets to June, can they talk Philly down and say, hey, how about a 2027 second and something else there? Because at that point, like if you do get to June, yes, financially it's more beneficial for Philadelphia, but most teams have their needs filled. Like that's another piece of the Jalen Waddle trade. Now Denver would not be interested in A.J. Brown, and you're getting to a point where, you know, on June 1st, training camp is 7.5 weeks away. So it's like there is a fine line there where like Philly has leverage, but if it goes on a little too long, then it swings back to the Patriots. And I think if you're the Patriots, can you thread that needle without giving up and sap? I agree with you. What I think is going to be a pretty valuable 2027 first round pick.
Right. If they go 10-7 this year, right? And again, they might be as good a football team and still go 10-7 because of the schedule. And, you know, we know how occasionally a bounce of a ball goes your way one year, doesn't go your way another year, and a win becomes a loss. At that point, now you're looking at maybe 20, 21 as opposed to 31. And of course, we always hear that next year draft is better and deeper. We hear that every year till we get to the draft. And sometimes it's like, well, wait till next year's draft. That's really going to be the mother lode. But I think you have to also play this with who else is interested in A.J. Brown. We've heard the Rams are interested, but the Rams seem to be interested in everybody.
That makes zero sense.
Makes zero sense. They already have two phenomenal wide receivers.
Nakua in the deal because they don't think.
Well, and the thing about the Rams too is like, and it's not like they just used a lot of draft capital to get Trent McDuffie. So it's like even if they like A.J. Brown. Right. Yeah, like what are you going to trade? Your 2034 first round pick? I mean, if you're I'm joking, but like they used a bunch of capital to get McDuffie. They have Nakua. I don't see. I mean, they were interested. I think after the McDuffie trade, I just don't see them being able to pull it off.
Let me throw one more thing out there too. Howie Roseman, who most people believe is the best executive in football. Do you trust him that there's a deal in place and that it's going to be executed? I mean, a deal is a deal only when it's signed and delivered and agreed upon at that point. Like at some point, he may have a deal in place, but then when you get to June 1st or June 2nd, it's like, oh, some other team is interested with better value for A.J. Brown. I don't know. These are things that this happened with the Colorado Rockies and the Boston Red Sox a few years ago, where both teams feuded over what they were going to have as a deal. And this also, to bring it to baseball, feels an awful lot like Kevin Millar. Remember the year Kevin Millar joined the Red Sox? We were hearing about him for months and months and months. I thought they were, acquiring Miguel Cabrera, not Kevin Millar, but they finally got Millar and obviously won a World Series with him. But it's just strange because you don't really see this in the NFL with, we're going to make that deal on June 1st or 2nd. It's kind of like untreaded waters at this point.
Well, it's the money. That's the thing.
Right.
I mean, Philadelphia, if Philadelphia trades him right now, they got to eat $43 million.
Right.
If they trade him after June 1st, that number becomes $16 million. So it's not that the Patriots, I think the Patriots, as I've said all along, are genuinely interested in him.
Mm-hmm.
Being around Mike Vrabel for a year, I just don't see him giving up a first-round pick for him. I just don't. And if he does, then you know what? He threw me a curveball, but I don't see it. I just don't. This idea that they'll draft a player at 31 and stash him for Philly for after June 1st, that's not the way that this front office is going to operate. It's not the way he's going to operate. They value the draft. They want to build this team through the draft so it's a sustainable championship contender. I don't think that they're going to be willing to throw away draft capital now or in the future for a guy that he likes and can still be a productive player for a couple more years, for a guy that he likes who's also going to be 29 years old and probably realistically has 1 to 3 good years in him before you really start to see the decline statistically. So for me, if he's a man of his word, and he made it very clear to us at the end of the season that he wants to build this roster through the draft, well, then I don't think you give up a first-round pick for A.J. Brown. And I know that may not sit well with some people in the media, that may not sit well with Patriot fans. I don't give up. I've said it all along, and I know, Sap, you've said this as well. I'm on record as saying it. I'm not giving up a first-round pick for A.J. Brown. I'm just not. I think it's a young man's league. You win with first and second contract guys. And at the end of the day, you know what? Yeah, third contract guys can win you games too, but the percentages of you winning with those guys drop as you go along here. I don't know, man. And it doesn't matter what the 27 draft class looks like. You guys have both made a great point. You're probably going to be picking higher next year. That's a premium pick in the NFL. It's not the NBA, where in the NBA, once you get outside the top 10, it's a crapshoot, right? It's not like the NHL, where once you get outside the top 10, those guys need to develop. It's not Major League Baseball, where if you get outside the top 10, those guys aren't going to play for 3 years. In the NFL, those guys have to play right away. So I'm not giving up a pick from 20 to 25 for A.J. Brown in 2027. I'm just not doing it.
I think it's a fair point. Like, I would be open to giving up the 2026 first round pick. Obviously, I don't think that'll happen. We've talked about why it'll be after June. The 2027 one does give me a lot more pause. Like, and the more I think about it, especially, and part of it is the quality of that draft, and part of it is where are they going to be organizationally, because even like in 2027 we're going to be talking about Drake May still only in his 3rd year, and Gonzalez still in his prime, and Henderson still only entering his 3rd year. Like, we're still going to be talking about a very young team that you want to add to. And I think another part of this is, and I think Jalen Waddle and his trade is evidence of this, there's always a guy or two available that you don't foresee. Like, I don't know about you guys, I really didn't think Jalen Waddle was going to get traded till I saw that he got traded.
No, I thought that they would have held on to him.
Yeah, because the age and everything, right? And like A.J. Brown, when he got traded from the Titans, I didn't think he was going to get traded till he got traded. And maybe there's a guy like that we see as the draft gets closer. Like, maybe it's T. Higgins. Maybe it's somebody else like that.
Marvin Harrison Jr.
Marvin Harrison, and that's another one.
Because your point, John, I think there's going to be a race to the top next year, and this sucks to say, but the NFL is going to look a little bit like the NBA because of this draft. You're going to have 3 or 4 franchises that are going to purposefully try to, quote, rebuild in 2026, when in fact the reality is it's a race to a top 5 pick, because you're going to have the quarterbacks up there next year. You're going to have Jeremiah Smith. It's
Ryan Williams too, if he has a good bounce back year. You like,
So you're gonna have a lot of talent sitting there. That's how these teams are gonna reload.
Yeah, and I mean, you can tell how like nerdy we are that we're already excited about the 2027 draft. But I think a lot of NFL teams view it the same way, and I think that's where these picks again. there's talent in every draft. We've talked about this before, John, you and I, where the teams that say, oh, the talent's not there, that's generally an excuse. There's good players in every
This
draft.
draft is loaded at the edge and defensive end position.
Exactly.
Like,
but I think
in this draft.
But I think the 2027 draft, to your point, at the quarterback position is better. I think Jeremiah Smith could be a truly generational receiver as well at the top. So I could see there being a guy, and I know I mentioned T. Higgins, you said Marvin Harrison Jr. Like, there could be a guy out there that's available that we're not thinking of, that all of a sudden the week of the draft. Yeah. Okay, right. That we're not thinking of. Him. Yeah. Right. That we're not thinking of, that suddenly becomes available. Like, even Chris Olave's name has kind of been bounced around, and you can like him more than A.J. Brown, you can like him less than A.J. Brown, whatever. But like that, I would be cognizant of that too, that maybe there's a guy out there we're not expecting to be available that's going to become available. And if you don't have to use your 2027 first round pick, I think that's, the route you want to go.
You have to look at the player too, A.J. Brown. Do you really want him? I think he's a descending player. He's 29 years old. He's a contested catch type guy, big physical receiver. I don't know if they age well. Like you said, Sarianides, maybe 1 to 3 years at most for this one player here. And also the whole thing with A.J. Brown, and he was in a prime position, especially the year the Eagles won the Super Bowl. I mean, he had a great number 2 receiver in Devontae Smith. You had a great tight end in Dallas Goedert, the best offensive line in football, the best running back in football, and a very good quarterback, and he was still bitching and moaning. So I don't know if he is going to be the guy that's going to come in and seamlessly fit into, as Mike Vrabel talks about, the culture. Yes, you need football players, but if the coach is talking about culture, if this guy comes in and is reading a book on the sideline because he only has 4 targets that day instead of 6, then we have an issue.
Yeah, and I don't think, look, I think the one thing is Mike Vrabel's a different dude than Nick Sirianni. I think he commands a much different level of respect. He has an aura and a presence about him. He's an alpha. This is why these guys want to come here and play for him. And I'm not saying Sirianni doesn't have alpha tendencies, because he does. Every coach in the NFL does. You can't coach football, period. And Lyons, you know this. We both have coached. You've got to have an alpha mentality to be a football coach. You can be a beta and coach these other sports, but not football. It's a different deal. And so I think that's part of the appeal, I think, for an A.J. Brown. He wants to play for Vrabel again. You've heard Kevin Byard talk about it in the past week about why it was important for him to reconnect with Vrabel. But that's only going to get you so far, because to your point, Sap, if he's not getting the target share that he wants, if he's not a focal point in the offense, and let's not paint him as a contested catch guy. He can do more than that. But I do think at the end of the day, my issue is it's a first and second contract league. You win with young guys. You win with guys in the 22 to 28 age range in this league consistently. And I think, in my opinion, he's now outside of that. You might get 2 more years out of him, but is it worth what you're going to have to pay? Because if, let's say, the Jalen Waddle trade is the barometer, you have to give up a first-round pick. If you don't give up a first-round pick next year, you're not getting him.
Yeah, I'm always going to remember March 22nd is the day Sarianides called me an alpha. So thank you for that. But what I'm curious of,
he didn't call me an alpha, and he's pretty accurate with that.
No, you're a gamma.
Wow.
So I think I agree with you guys that I think Brown is like a 2 to 3 year thing, right? Ideally, like, I know a lot of receivers, they get to 32, 33, and then they kind of draw down. I could see Brown, maybe it happens at 31 going into 32. I think it's a 2 to 3 year thing. So I think the key question here, guys, how close are they to actually being a Super Bowl champion? And I know on the surface, that sounds ridiculous because they just made the Super Bowl. But as we saw, a lot of things broke their way, starting with health, then sure, the schedule, and then some injuries to opponents, Bo Nix, all that. So when we saw them in the Super Bowl, they battled, they competed, but they were overmatched, especially at key positions. So were they close enough that if you add an A.J. Brown, all of a sudden you're a team that can beat Seattle in a Super Bowl or beat the Rams in a Super Bowl? Or do you need more than that? Like, I go back to, like, in 06, the Patriots lose the AFC Championship game. That was a really good team on the whole, but they had nothing at receiver. So they had Moss, Stallworth, and Welker, and then they go to the Super Bowl. I know they lose, but they have a great season. Or 2013, they lose a close AFC Championship game. They add Revis, they add Brown, or they add LaFell. Boom, they can win the Super Bowl. Like, are you that close? Or is this a scenario kind of like 2001? I know we mentioned this last week where, yeah, they got back to the Super Bowl a couple of years later, but with a lot of different guys around that court. Like, I think that's the question to answer here is, are they an A.J. Brown and a Romeo Doubs and a Draymond Jones away from winning the Super Bowl? Or is there more work to be done over the offseason or so? Like, again, I know it sounds silly on the surface because they just made the Super Bowl, but they also had a lot of things break their way that, to your earlier point, Sap, you can't really bank on that stuff all breaking your way 2 years in a row.
They still have a lot of work to do because they were pretty much dominated on both lines of scrimmage against the Seattle Seahawks. And that's still, as I'm going to pump up Sarianides here, that's where games are won and lost, still at the line of scrimmage. And they were overmatched by the Seahawks on both sides. And that's something they're going to have
and
to
by
address.
a Seattle team, by the way, that wasn't great up front on either side of the ball.
No.
That's the concerning thing.
Right.
I know that nationally everybody loves to tongue bathe McDonald and the Seahawks, but they weren't dominant up front during the year. They weren't. That defensive line is a good defensive line, but they weren't as good as the Patriots made them look.
The Rams toyed with them in two matchups. In the NFC Championship game, put up 27 on the board, should have scored more. They had a muffed punt, which led to a Seattle touchdown. And then in the regular season, they couldn't stop Matthew Stafford.
And those two games prove what I've said, that I think Sean McVay is so supremely overrated as a coach because he cannot manage games well. And it showed up in those two games.
I just don't think they took special teams seriously enough, and that was their fatal flaw, and it came back to bite them because the two teams were so close. But you could still be the best coach in the NFL and be overrated. That can be a case, and that might be the case with Sean McVay. I mean, we as you use the term, tongue bathe him as if he's just invented football. Wouldn't go so far as that, but it's going to be interesting to see with A.J. Brown go forward, and I have the great landing place for him in 2 years. He'll be a Jet in 2 years because they love signing 31, 32-year-old players that are on their third contract that are bridge players. A.J. Brown will be a Jet within 2 years.
And we'll see. It remains to be seen. I mean, again, I think if you take what Vrabel said at the end of last season at face value, they want to build through the draft. They value draft picks. And I think if that's the case, you're not going down that road. And let's be honest here, fellas. What's going to happen in Philadelphia if they don't trade him? Does he show up?
I think he shows up to the mandatory things like the mini camp training because he's not going to not get paid. And also, too, like if you're Philly, okay, you fire your OC, you bring in a new OC. Now, he's not going to be at OTAs, or I'd be shocked if he was. But what if OTAs go really well? And then all of a sudden he's starting to hear, oh, this new OC's legit. Jalen Hurts looks better.
Right.
Does
now
he kind of slowly...
Sean Mannion is young. He just retired
Sure.
playing 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years
Sure.
ago. So.
And so it could go the other way, right? But like, let's say it's good. Does that get him back in the fold there? Or another thing that and I mentioned earlier, guys being available we don't expect. What if there's another team out there that has a significant receiver injury in OTAs or something like that? And then they say, oh, well, we need A.J. Brown now. And they go and get so there are some variables here to kind of think of when it comes to that. And I just think it's very easy to say, oh, they'll have the deal done, June 2nd. There are a lot of things that could happen. I mean, they very well could, but there are a lot of things that could happen between now and then.
Yeah, and the fact that you trust Howie Roseman, who, again, I think is the best executive in the sport, or at least among them, I wouldn't put it past him to have a handshake agreement. And then when we get to June, all of a sudden, like you said, Lyons, other teams get into the discussion for A.J. Brown, and they get a better offer and make that move.
Yeah, well, good luck to them then. I mean, I again, another guy in Roseman that he's another one that gets tongue bathed that everybody loves. I mean, another guy that everybody thinks reinvented front office play.
Like, I don't know. Like if I'm sorry to cut you off, I'm just thinking out loud. Like if I'm the Houston Texans, I'd probably look at it and say, no, yeah, I'd probably look at it and say, if Nico Collins plays and CJ Stroud throws 2 interceptions instead of 5, we probably beat the Patriots and then beat the Broncos. So why don't we go get A.J. Brown? Because Tank Dell's still working his way back. Yeah, a team like that. Like I'm like, well, maybe we go get that guy. Like, or if you're the Atlanta Falcons and you're like, we need to do everything we can for Michael Penix. We like Drake London. We have Bijan Robinson. Why don't we go get A.J. Brown and win the NFC South and get to the, like, that's the other piece. Like, I wonder if there's some other teams kind of lurking, and Houston's the one that I would worry about most, that think, hey, we're on the edge here of being one of the great teams. Let's see if we can do. I mean, if you're the Kansas City Chiefs and you say, hey, we missed the playoffs, Mahomes is going to come back, but we're missing that truly great player in our receiving core. Kelsey's getting older, someone to complement Xavier Worthy. Like, again, like, they just got a bunch of picks for Trent McDuffie too. So, like, even if they trade for Brown, they can absorb some of that. So
that's another team that I think you talk about teams that are lurking. I could see him ending up in Kansas City.
Kansas City and Houston worry me the most, and I would add Carolina to that list. I even Tampa Bay, like some of these teams. I would add Jacksonville to that list if they move Brian Thomas. Like, there are a few teams, Kansas City and Houston, leading the way that I think are going to be lurking there. That I wouldn't be shocked if they end up with him.
And it's a case, too, where I think the AFC is wide open. I mean, for years it was Brady, then it was Mahomes. And when is Mahomes coming back? And teams that did make the playoffs last year are still considered contenders, like Cincinnati and Baltimore. They didn't make the playoffs last year. They did Kansas City. And you all can expect them maybe to contend this year. So it's a free-for-all in the AFC. So everybody thinks they're maybe one or two players away from contending. And then they look at what Denver and the Patriots did last year, both going 14-3, and they kind of turned things around pretty quickly.
And let's not forget, Kansas City seems to think that Mahomes is going to be back for week 1. So if the prevailing thought in that building is that Patrick Mahomes plays week 1, you just lost Hollywood Brown. He left at free agency. You don't have that other guy there. Sky Moore left at free agency. You don't really have that other guy opposite Xavier Worthy, and Rice. You need that third guy. And guess what? If you're Kansas City, you have that pick. And let's not forget the Andy Reid, Howie Roseman connection there. So I could totally 100% see those two getting together. Kansas City giving up that pick they got from the Rams in the Trent McDuffie trade and getting A.J. Brown. If I were a betting man, I think the Chiefs are the favorites, the true favorites to land A.J. Brown. Because, again, if, let's say, they're steadfast on that first-round pick and Roseman thinks he can get it out of Kansas City and not get it out of New England next year, he's going to get it out of Kansas City now, take the sure thing, and trade him there. Again, I don't see it happening pre-June 1st because that's a big nut to take here if you're the Kansas City Chiefs. But the Philadelphia Eagles. But at the end of the day, after June 1st, Lions, I think you bring up a great point, man. I think there's going to be a lot more suitors in this than people think around here.
And I would add, too, I think Sap brought up a good point. Like, Baltimore's another team. Like, you sign Trey Hendrickson, you don't trade those first-round picks for Max Crosby, whatever you think of that. But you have those picks now. You have Zay Flowers, Lamar Jackson, new coach. Like, are they an A.J. Brown away? Like, and that's I think if you're one of those teams, if you're Houston, Kansas City, or Baltimore, you can really talk yourself into saying, hey, if we get A.J. Brown and we stay healthy, we can go to the Super Bowl. And I think that's what this could come down to. And does one of those teams, whether it's Houston, Baltimore, Kansas City, are they willing to have a greater offer than the Patriots? And I think you get to June 2nd, you get to June 3rd, maybe they do, and they decide. Maybe they get through OTAs, and Kansas City says, "Oh, Mahomes, he's on his way. Let's get A.J. Brown." I think that's. I know it's fun to think they have a handshake agreement. Maybe they do, but Sap, to your point before, there's going to be teams lurking, and this could turn into something after June 1st, like a real bidding war.
Chiefs and Ravens are both in win-now mode, right, with the quarterbacks. Yep. They missed the playoffs last year. They both think they need a few things, a few tweaks to get back into the AFC Championship game or wherever they go. And again, Kansas City has 2 first-round picks. They have their own, and they also have the Rams first-round pick. So they can play around with those a little bit. I wouldn't trade the 9th pick overall in this draft for A.J. Brown, but you see what you can do with that type of draft capital. I think it's not a done deal that he's coming to the Patriots. Again, they can talk about handshake deals, whatever, but we know these front office guys can't be trusted. And I think that that's something that you're going to have to just kind of talk about for the next 5-6 weeks. And then after that, after the draft as well.
All right. We've talked about A.J. Brown way too long, but I will ask you one final question on this real quick. Do you think that the Patriots feel the squeeze if, let's say, Kansas City, Houston, Baltimore, teams that are going to be their primary contenders in the AFC, do you, or their primary competition, I should say, do you see a scenario where they feel the pressure and they up their package and they decide to go all in and trade that 2027 first round pick?
No, I think if it gets into some sort of escalated bidding, they walk away. And we've seen them up their offer with money, right? They did it with Milton Williams in free agency. I don't think they'll do it with draft picks. And I think they look at it as May's a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. So, yeah, they would want A.J. Brown, but they're not going to overpay because May will elevate guys anyway. So I think if it gets in some sort of back and forth bidding with Houston and KC, Baltimore, I think the Patriots at that point would walk away. And I would agree with them for walking away at that point.
I would too. Yeah, I wouldn't get into a bidding war for A.J. Brown. I don't think he's an elite level receiver anymore. Maybe he is, go power rank the receivers on your own time. But, I don't think they're going to go into a Mike Ditka for Ricky Williams type situation where they're hell bent on getting the player, because then all of a sudden they're going to be giving up even more draft capital. And I agree that Vrabel wants to build this franchise through the draft, which is the best way to do it. And I think Mike Vrabel is such a smart guy. He realizes that they need more help. They're not going to just turn back the team that was out there last year, do it again, and expect to be back in the Super Bowl. They know they need help.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. I don't see any scenario where they overpay for him. And I think ultimately that's going to be the difference. Now, again, we say that Kansas City, Baltimore, Houston will be in on it. But again, if the Eagles are stuck on the idea that they don't want to eat an additional $25 million in cap space or whatever it is, if it happens after June 1st, those franchises in many ways are going to be in the same boat as the Patriots. Do you give up that 2027 first round pick for them? I do think that one of those three teams will ultimately be more willing, especially if you're Kansas City, where you could sit back and say, all right, if Mahomes is back, we've retooled it, we've added Kenneth Walker. If we add an A.J. Brown, we're back to Super Bowl contention now. We'll be one of the favorites. Screw it. Let's just do it. We're probably going to be picking in the 25 to 32 range anyway. Let's just give it to them. So if I had to say a favorite in terms of a landing spot, I really think it's the Kansas City Chiefs. I would make them the favorite right now, because I think that they're going to have enough confidence in who they are as an organization that they'd be willing to give up that first round pick. And again, the Roseman-Reed relationship is going to matter here. So I think that's another part of it as well. You are watching Patriots Pulse. I'm your host, John Sarianides. As always, I'm joined by my partners, WEI's John Lyons and John Sapochetti. And gentlemen, Patriots did make a signing this week. They fortified the secondary, signing veteran quarterback Kindle Vildor, who sounds like a Star Wars villain. Thoughts on the Kindle Vildor signing?
Yeah, I mean, I was disappointed when they let Alex Austin walk, and maybe I was just more attached to Alex Austin than other folks were. I thought he really developed nicely, but I mean, I think this is kind of what that is, a depth corner signing. Nothing against it. I just think, again, it's a depth corner signing. It's a nice piece. I think it relieves them of having to worry about spending a mid or late round pick on a corner, unless there's a guy they really love in that spot and they want to bring in. Great. But I think it's essentially a depth corner signing. I mean, he's not going to beat out Carlton Davis. He's obviously not going to beat out Gonzalez or Marcus Jones in the slot, but you got to have those guys.
But he can be
right?
your fourth corner and play in dime packages.
And I think that's valuable, right? Because I think you're going to play, we talk about the schedule all the time.
He
but
can
you're
also
play
play
a
on
lot
the outside, too, which is another thing. He can play boundary corner. So,
and you're going to play a lot of good offenses this year. And I think you're going to need, and again, health-wise, you're going to need depth there at corner. And given that they have needs at other positions, I'll take, because what did we talk about, too? These are the types of signings, not sexy, not headline grabbing. They needed to add more depth. And again, I wish they had just kept Alex Austin, but I like this, I like this signing for that purpose of it as well. Just don't expect him to be, a high impact player.
You can never have enough defensive backs or offensive linemen. They're the two biggest units on your team, especially like you said, Sarianides. If you're in dime package, you need a bunch of them out there. That's the majority of the defense at that point. So the more, the merrier when it comes to defensive backs, offensive linemen. He seems like a versatile player, and as Lyons said, a depth piece, which is what they need, because they were fortunate last year. They were not really hurt all that much by the injury bug. That doesn't always happen year after year after year.
no, I like the signing. I think he's a veteran player that can add something. I hate to say this and be that guy, as productive as he was in Detroit in particular. He played for Chicago, he played for Tampa. He can also be a guy who ends up getting cut in camp. I mean, so he's not a guaranteed to make the roster. And I think that as much as we sit here and we talk about depth, I think that the Patriots, I mean, they play roughly 75% nickel, which means they technically don't need that fourth corner per se. They could try if they want to go into their 6 defensive back stuff, they could do it with a safety as well and play a hybrid slot corner safety type. So it wasn't necessarily a need per se. I do agree with you, Lyons. I probably would have stuck it out with Alex Austin. He was a restricted free agent. I probably would have re-signed him, given him a 1-year deal like Miami did, and see what you have there and if you could develop him. But I mean, they ultimately wanted more experience back there. And to your point, he is a guy though that has played a lot of football. And if you do have an injury, whether it be at the field corner or the boundary corner, you can play him over there and probably get by for a week or two. That's primarily what he's going to be, and he'll be a primary special teamer. But again, I think that the secondary, in my opinion, it's so hard for me because we talked about this last week with whether or not you pay Gonzalez, right? I'm gonna sound like an a-hole here, and I'm one of those guys that I find another position that I think is overvalued. And yes, I'd rather have a good collection of defensive backs than overpay one guy. So I think from that standpoint, he fits in. But like I said, he may not even make the team. And then, you talked about it, Lions. They may take a flyer on the guy middle to late day 3. Maybe that guy beats him out. I mean, they do have some young guys like a Marcellus Dial that I think they're going to give a long look to. But I think ultimately he's a good veteran signing. And one of the things we see here is Vrabel values that veteran presence. He wants that in the locker room.
Yeah, I mean, we just saw him swap out Hawkins for Kevin Byard, and not exactly the same player, but a guy who knew him better, more veteran guy. And I think, again, it's one of those depth signings. It gives them a little more flexibility, as I mentioned with the draft. Like if there's a 5th-round corner they really like, great. But if it's a 5th-round corner, but then there's a tight end there they like more, they can feel satisfied taking the tight end because they have that flexibility there. So that, to me, that's where the value of this. I mean, if this guy's playing 8 games for you, it's probably a problem. But it gives you that little bit of flexibility and that depth, which I think helps you out.
And they have 11 draft picks, so they can maneuver a lot. I don't know if they're going to select 11 players. They might move some around.
Yeah,
but they have 11 picks right now to play around 4 in the 6th round. So we'll see what they can do with those.
Yeah, and those picks will be invaluable day 3 because those picks will allow you to move around day 3, especially if you want to get into the 5th round. There's a player there you want to target. And let's not forget, again, at the risk of sounding like a guy who shits on all these other leagues, unlike these other leagues, though, the NFL draft, you guys need to play right away. If there's a guy that you identify as a guy that can help you win football games in the middle to late rounds, you got to go get him. And so it's a little different than the other sports. Guys don't marinate in the NFL. They need to step in and play right away. Real quick before we get into what we've designated as our top 5 draft needs, top 30 visits are coming up. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, we're in the midst of pro days right now. A couple of intriguing local guys that I would keep an eye on for the Patriots tomorrow at that BC Pro Day. Jude Bowery, W. Lemieux. 2 guys that I think are going to play inside at guard. Lemieux, I could see playing center in the NFL. Jude Bowery is working with Dante Scarnecchia. And I'm involved with an offensive line venture called Trenchtown. And we've got some good information on how those workouts are going. And I've said all along that I feel that Jude Bowery is a guard in the NFL. You're talking about a guy who's 6 feet, 6'5", 315, athletic, can move, but not a guy that can necessarily play in space. Elliott Wolf and Mike Vrabel are both expected to be at the Boston College Pro Day tomorrow. That's a guy that they could target potentially. Now we're starting to hear about some of the top 30 visits that they lined up. Jeremy Fowler tweeted out yesterday that KC Concepcion is one of their top 30 visits. Now, I think he's the most explosive playmaking receiver in this draft class. I think when you talk about a guy that's that hybrid FZ slot receiver that you can use in motion, move him around in your formations, and try to create one-on-one matchups with, he's that guy. He's also a guy that can be a factor in the return game. Now, we're not sitting here. I think we all universally agree that at 31, they're more than likely going to take an edge. They've been fawning over this edge group. Sure, it could be a ruse. It could be a smoke screen. They could potentially go best player available and go somewhere else. But does that tell you that receiver is a position that they're interested in? Because Concepcion's a first-round talent. Does that tell you that they could potentially go receiver at 30. And again, I hate to come back to effing A.J. Brown with all this, but could that also potentially, if they take a receiver there, close the book on Brown?
I think it could depend on how the board falls, where if they get to pick
Yeah.
31 and a lot of those edge guys are still there and they're confident there'll be
You're
some
going
in the
to take
mid to
one of
late,
them.
right, then or that's where you take Concepcion and then you get one of those edge guys. Either you trade up in the second round or you bank on a good edge play being there at the end of the second round. So I think some of that will be determined on how the board falls, because I agree with you. I think he's a guy that the only way they're going to get him is if they draft him at 31. Like, he's not going to be there in the second round.
No,
You know,
I
he's
have a
not gonna
feeling
fall.
he's going to be gone by then.
He
but-
very well could be. Yeah, they might have to trade up to 24, 25 to even get him.
Right.
And so that's where I think it might be determined. Like, if all of a sudden picks 11 through 18, 4 edge guys get taken and they're worried about, getting one of those truly good edge players, then they probably go edge at 31. But if you get to 31 and there's still a bunch of edge guys left, you get in that range, then maybe they could go receiver at that point.
What do you think of this administration? Will they trade up if they really target a player, like you said, Lyons, at 22, 23, 24, 6, 7 spots ahead of where they are now? They really have their eye on a player, and they don't want to take a chance that he's going to still be there at 31.
Yeah, I think that is the thing, to Sarianides' earlier question, that would maybe stop them on an A.J. Brown trade. Where, like, if they use like a high day 3 pick to trade up in the first round to get somebody, then you're really going to trade more picks on top of it. Like, that to me is where you could have your line of demarcation and you don't end up making a trade for a veteran player if you use other picks to trade up in the first round. And I'm not saying they wouldn't do it. I'd be kind of surprised. Like, Elliott Wolf comes from Green Bay, like that stick and pick philosophy. And I'm not saying they wouldn't do it. I would be surprised. Like, it's something unique with a truly great player might have to be there at 24 or 25 for them to jump at it.
Yeah, I don't see them moving up either. I'd be surprised. Yeah. I could see them moving up a couple of spots, but I don't see them making this big 7-8 pick jump up to get a guy. And part of the reason is I think this edge group is so deep that if on their board they have 4, 5, 6 guys that they like, I know Patriot fans aren't going to want to hear this. You might want to cover your ears. I could see them trading out of the first round. And
I can see that.
Trading down 4, 5, 6 spots, adding an additional maybe late second round or early third round pick. And then all of a sudden, now, if there's a guy you think could potentially be there 5, 6 picks later, let's say at 36, 37, you get that extra pick, you go to work night 2, you add that player, now you have potentially 3 other picks on top of that pick in day 2 to potentially now go out and really fortify this roster. Now, again, that will depend on how they view this edge position. Do they think that a Cassius Howell from a Texas A&M or an R. Mason Thomas from an Oklahoma, do they think those guys fit their scheme? Because Zion Young could be gone by the time they get to 31. But do they think those guys are good enough? They're twitchy. They fit their scheme. They're in that 6'2", 6'2.5", 250, 260-pound range. Good first step explosiveness. They play with natural bend. Do they think those guys are guys that are just as good as a Zion Young? Maybe not as stout, but just as good. And you know what? We can live with one of those 2 guys. I think what's interesting is Draymond Jones physically is a departure from what K'Lavon Chason was last year. So I do think, is he going to look at this? Or are they going to look at this and say, no, we want a true defensive end, not necessarily an edge guy, but a true defensive end that is in that 6'3", 6'4", 275, 280-pound range that can play in a 3-point stance. We can run it in a tilt 5 and get them up the field that way rather than play them in a 2-point stance. A lot of those other guys, I think, are undersized, old school 3-4 outside linebacker types. That's going to be an internal conversation that I think they're going to need to have about that position and what they do at 31.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation, too, because Vrabel traditionally has not had huge defensive ends. But if they say, hey, we're going to spend a ton of time in nickel, or we're not going to use our off-ball linebackers as much, do you want more size then at edge, at defensive end, to kind of compensate for that? So I think it'll be an interesting thing to monitor. And look, the trade down, not fun for a lot of fans, but I think it's on the table. And I think, guys, philosophically, day 2 of the draft is oftentimes what separates good teams from great teams, right? You can find really good players in round 1. You can find diamonds in the rough in rounds 5, 6, and 7. But if you consistently draft well in the 2nd and 3rd round, your team is going to be really, really good. And we just saw this front office with Travion Henderson and Jared Wilson take multiple starters on day 2 of the draft. And they probably feel confident they can do that again. So if they trade down and all of a sudden they're sitting there with 2 second-round picks, then they're picking in the 3rd round, they have an extra 3rd rounder, maybe either this year or next year, I could see that being a really attractive option for them, because the only trade-off really is you don't have the 5th-year option. Like, if you get the player you want at 39 instead of 31 and you sacrifice the 5th-year option, but you pick up an extra, day 2 pick in the future, then I think that's really attractive, as long as you're okay sacrificing, that option there. In some scenarios, that's good. Others, it's not. I could maybe see it this year.
Correct me if I'm wrong. This appears to be top-heavy draft where 9, 10, 11 players seem to be at one level, or at least a half a step above the rest. Does the rest of the draft,
It's
especially
every
the first
draft.
pretty much, right? But is 11 through 64, which would constitute the rest of the first and the entire 2nd round, is there a discernible difference among all those players?
You can't. Yeah, you can't. That's not. You can't answer that question because it goes back to what I say all the time. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. Once you get to that point, it becomes more about scheme fit, the character of the player, their background work, projection. Can they be productive players where it translates? There's so many variables that go into it from that point on. Where, to your point about your top 10 guys, are typically guys we all know that the top 5 picks now are in some order, are usually nailed by everybody who does their mock drafts every other day. But to your point, John, about 11 to 64, then you start getting into the weeds here now, because all of those factors that I just mentioned come into play.
And I think there's a big variance, and I don't know if it's more than other years. It kind of feels that way positionally, where like tight end, I think there's a big drop off. At edge, I don't think there's a big drop off. At off ball linebacker, like Deontay Lawson's one of my favorite players in the whole draft. He's probably a 3rd round pick. Like, I don't know if there's a huge.
It's not a position that traditionally gets drafted high either, especially in the modern NFL.
And so I think at some positions there is a huge drop off. At others, and like quarterback, I feel like is all over the place this year. Like, I like Mendoza at the top. There's not a lot of other guys I like that much. Like, so I think there's, I don't know. Again, I don't know if this
is
more
than
than
other years. You're going to see a run on quarterbacks, though. I think in the 2nd round, you could see a run in the 2nd and 3rd round. A guy who's supremely intriguing, and some GM's going to put his reputation at stake with him, is Drew Aller out of Penn State. That's a guy
he could have been a top 5 pick if he came out a year ago, I think. And the way that Penn State thing, not that this is Penn State Pulse, but the way that
Penn
came
State
about
Pulse,
where
your host John Lyons.
But the way that when they have a $20 million roster, got to the semifinal the year before, and by the end of the year, Aller's hurt, their coach is fired, the team is out of it completely. It was, I don't know if I've seen
complete overreaction in my opinion too. Franklin got them on the doorstep of playing for a national title,
and
he's gone less than 10 months later.
Yeah, they built a statue for Joe Paterno, and he won 1 national championship in 45 years. Like, Franklin built a really good program, by the way, on the heels of a big scandal, and Bill O'Brien helped set the foundation there. But that situation, it's funny because there's a lot to like about Drew Aller. I just don't know what's the health really look like. Last year, like, how much of that was him? And I mean, if he doesn't throw an interception in overtime against Oregon last year, maybe their whole season is totally different. Like, I don't know. Like, so I think it's a great point, John, that somebody's going to take a risk on him and he can end up being a truly great player, or we're going to look at it and say, man, 2 years ago was just kind of one great year for him. That was his ceiling and that was it.
It's going to be interesting with him too, and I don't want to get into quarterback talk too much because they may take a quarterback late, but it's not a position of need per se. But he's also the kind of guy, we saw this last year with Shedeur Sanders, right? He's also the kind of guy that could fall into the 5th or 6th round.
Yeah.
And if he does, and somebody takes a flyer on him, and it could very well be the Patriots at that point with the number of 6th round picks they have. But if he does, no one's going to be surprised because, again, the size is there, the arm talent is there, but does he have it between the ears? Can he stay healthy? The decision-making is clearly a problem. So I think when you look at a player like that, I mean, to go back to Sap's 11 to 64 question, that's a guy now that you're looking at a 5 to 6 round gap where he could go either mid to late second, early third, all the way to the bottom of the 6th round. You're looking at about a 3 to 4 round difference there. So we'll see.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I think positionally there's a lot of variance, and to your kind of perennial point, it also largely depends on what these teams like once you get out of that first round, especially.
All right, let's talk about what they need in the draft. So we're past free agency. We know what they've done in free agency. Last segment of the show here. Let's talk about what they need in the draft. So I'm going to ask both of you what you think their top 5 needs are in the draft. So what are their top 5 draft needs, starting with you, John Lyons?
Yeah, I think it's defensive end, receiver, and when I say receiver, I'm talking about like a high end guy that can, and that might not even be in the draft, but a high end guy there. Off ball linebacker like Robert Spillane, really like him as a player. I think he's really good. They don't really have anything there beyond him, so I think off-ball linebacker is a big need. Offensive tackle, and I think this is a sneaky one because, yes, Will Campbell was a top 5 pick, but Morgan Moses is in his mid-30s. Marcus Bryant, I like him, but he's a 7th-round pick who they're still developing. I think you need some more talent there and some more young talent as well. And then 5th, I put tight end, and to be honest with you guys, if this was a deeper tight end draft, I might put it higher. I just don't think beyond Sadiq, there's guys there that are going to be worth drafting in the first couple days for them. So I think tight end is a real need for them. I just put it 5th because I don't see the draft class really lining up for them at tight end.
I pretty much have the same list as Lyons, except maybe in a different order. Edge rusher number 1, because as you guys have pointed out, it's such a deep draft there that even if you stay at 31, you should get a productive player at that position. At least you hope. Second to me is offensive tackle, because again, Morgan Moses is as old as Moses. So how long is he going to last? And then we don't know about Will Campbell. I think he's going to remain as a tackle, especially next year, but we don't know where his future lies. So I would start to try to get somebody in the building who's going to be at least a talented developmental type player, or someone that you may have to call upon to play right away if Moses goes down with an injury. Those are the 2 big needs I look at. I would also like to add some depth on the interior defensive line too, because again, Barmore's coming back. We get that, but again, he's kind of an unpredictable sort, so you don't know, what's going to happen with him next year. If he's focused at playing football, he's really, really good player. But I think you need to have a little bit of depth there. Wide receiver, because you have to take one to hope that you maybe in the 3rd, 4th, 5th round, wherever, that you find someone that can play. And tight end is to me a dire need, because I think Hunter Henry is a tremendous player, but he's obviously on the back 9, and you need a little bit more productivity and explosiveness from that position. If you can find a tight end, I think that's be another spot I would go.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. Julian Hill, I think, is going to be a bigger part of their offense than he was in Miami, and I think he'll be more of a target in the passing game. But this is not the year to need a tight end. So unless, like you've repeatedly said, Lyons, unless a Kenyon Sadiq is sitting there and you go the best player route and the best player available route, realistically speaking, you're now looking at. I mean, if they really like the tight end class. I've talked to a scout that said they're very high on this class, more so than other teams. So take that for what it's worth. But I think a lot of the names you're looking at after that, Reardon, Stowers, Claire, those guys are going to go probably middle, late 2nd round, more than likely 3rd, 4th round. So I don't see them. If they take one, that's probably the sweet spot, 3rd or 4th round. We'll see. For me, edge is number 1. It's been their number 1 need, in my opinion, since last year. I've always said I felt they were a guy short there. That's their number 1 need. Number 2 for me is offensive tackle. I think both of you bring up a good point about Morgan Moses, his age. It's a concern. He's cheap, $8 million a year, so you can get through another year with him. He did sign a 3-year deal, but do you chance year 3? I'm going to say this. The Travion Henderson pick last year showed us that this organization is willing to take the best player available at a pick, that they're not necessarily married to need. And remember, that was Bill Belichick's approach to the draft as well. All of that being said, I would not be surprised if a guy like Monroe Freeling is sitting there at 31 and they're like, you know what? This edge group is deep enough that we can move around if we need to Friday night and move up and take one of those guys. Let's take a Monroe Freeling, best player available. He marinates for a year. He could be your right tackle after next year. And dare I say, and I'm a Will Campbell proponent and I support Campbell, but if they make that decision to kick him inside, Freeland can play left tackle. Now you have one hell of a left side. Now, what do you do with Elijah Vera Tucker? You gave him term and money, so it's highly unlikely. But that's a name to keep an eye on if he's sitting there at 31. I don't think he's going to be. I think he's going to be gone by then. But if he's sitting there, you never know. 3 for me is wide receiver only by default, really. It's wide receiver for me because I think if you don't get A.J. Brown, I do think you need that X receiver, that boundary receiver with size that can win in contested catch situations. Romeo Doubs could end up being your best receiver, but he may not end up being your most productive receiver, if that makes any sense. And I do think that this draft presents some options for them at 31. We talked about KC Concepcion earlier, but a Denzel Boston, a Jordan Tyson, I don't see him being there. Chris Brazzell, potentially from Tennessee. He fits the mold of the classic X receiver. He could be a potential option there. 4 for me is tight end. Hunter Henry going into the final year of his deal. Again, I don't think Kenyon Sadiq's going to be there. I do think they're going to take one, but I think it's probably going to be at some point either day 2, early day 3. And 5 for me is actually a position that I think a lot of people probably aren't going to talk about as a top need, but I think it is, and I think it's important for them long term because they do so much in their defensive scheme, and that's safety. You've got Craig Woodson, who looks like a long-term piece. Kevin Byard is only on a 1-year deal, and chances are he's probably not here next year. And so do you go safety early in this draft if there's a guy there that you like that think that they could fit in and play either as that box safety that screws down or plays over the top? They don't have a lot of depth there. They did add Mike Brown, who I think will be a nice special team player for him, and he'll be a backup. You have Del Pettis, but do you have a long-term guy that's going to be able to play next to Craig Woodson? I don't think that guy's in the building right now. So I think that's a bigger need for them than people think.
That's a great point, John. And I think some of it comes down to how do they feel about Del Pettis? Like 1 year of Kevin Byard, and then can he take over and be the safety with Woodson? That's kind of like I still think they want to bring in somebody else, and maybe they look to free agency.
Well, I thought they
next
should
year.
have re-signed Hawkins. I've been very adamant about that.
We talked about it last week.
Player, but he's not a long-term answer.
Yeah, no, hey, we talked about it last week. I agree, especially with that contract. I think they should have re-signed Jalen Hawkins. I disagree with them letting him walk. And maybe they look at free agency next year. Maybe they get to the draft next year and look at Woodson as a 3-year vet, like entering his 3rd year, so they can take a rookie to pair with Woodson at that point. I don't know, but I agree with you. I think it is a long-term need. And Sap, you brought up something like you mentioned defensive tackle. I wouldn't put that as a top 5 need. But I want them to take a defensive tackle in this draft for 2 reasons. 1, I think you can never have enough of those guys. Mm-hmm. And 2, I know they like Corey Durden and he had some good moments. I know Joshua Farmer they drafted last year, but I still don't look at it and say they have a 3rd guy next to Milton Williams and Barmore that I'm really confident in. So I just want, again, and I never can have enough of those defensive tackles. So I would agree. Not a top
in their
need.
Scheme, they want, to your point, John, in their scheme, they want depth there because they rotate a lot of guys.
Yeah. And look, and John, you made a great case last week about why not to give Kyrus Tonga $7 million a year. And I agree, but I still think you want to replace the body and replace the player, right? So like, I want them to take a defensive tackle. And frankly, I'd be fine with them taking a safety, even though they're not in my top 5 needs. When you have 11 picks, you can draft other things too. So I'd be fine with those 2 positions, especially defensive tackle this year.
Yeah, I mean, I just think obviously depth pieces, developmental pieces, and obviously first few rounds, if you can get someone that can step in, that's obviously the best scenario. But you kind of have to keep one eye on the present and one eye on the future because that's how you build a solid organization. And the Patriots seem to be doing that right now.
Yeah, and again, I think, when you look at safety on paper, you don't have to take a guy early, but a guy like Zachy Wheatley from Penn State, 6'2", 205, rangy, can play at all 3 levels. And he's a guy that they've met with, and he's a guy that's on their radar. That's a player that potentially you can get either middle to late day 2, early day 3. Now I'm turning into Mel Kiper, really good instincts. But I mean, I think it's one of those things where it's like, that's a potential player that they could target. Defensive tackle is interesting to me because Lyons, you bring up a good point in terms of you don't have to take one early. That group is deep too. You can get, especially if you're in the market for a space eater, a guy that can two gap a little bit or can play that shade nose and eat up weak side A gap. There's a lot of those body types in this draft that could fit that mold and be that fourth guy in a rotation.
Yeah, and like it's funny because we talked about you mentioned Wheatley, and we talked about how Penn State was just in a weird spot last year. Like another team like that is LSU. Like, what do they think of AJ Halsey? Like, was that LSU thing like Brian Kelly a disaster, or
I
do
like
they view
AJ
him?
Halsey as a player. I like
Yeah,
him a
and
lot.
he'd probably have to be a second round pick for them. But like I think there's some of those unique situations in college football from this past year. Like even if there's players from Indiana, like how much of that was Kirk Cignetti? How much of it is all those guys are like 25-year-old men? How much of it is just they're good players are going to be good NFL? Like this past year's college football season gave us some really unique. I mean, Alabama got beat 38-3 by Indiana in the Rose Bowl. Like there was some unique things that I think if you're the Patriots going into this draft, like are these LSU guys really that good and it was just a bad coaching situation? Was Penn State all bad luck, or is there a problem with Drew Aller and he didn't have Tyler Warren anymore? Like, is Indiana, some of those guys really that good, or was that the sum was greater than the parts? Like, it's interesting. Like, this draft is interesting to me from that perspective, especially at some of these positions as well.
Indiana almost feels like Baylor 6 or 7 years ago when they won the national championship in college basketball, and none of their players really did much in the NBA, but they were all juniors and seniors that played together for several years, were well coached, and they beat younger teams that were probably more talented. Sarianides, I talked after the Indiana national championship win over Miami. Miami had far more top prospects than Indiana at that point.
Indiana has more talent than you think. There's
Right,
guys.
but
There's 5 or 6
yeah.
guys from that team that were key players that are going to play in the NFL for a
Oh,
while.
I get it. But I think, when people are like, is this the best college football team of the century? No, it's the 2001 Miami Hurricanes, who had like 19 guys drafted
Right,
in
but
the
that
second
doesn't
or third
matter. I
round.
mean, they won a national
Yeah.
championship.
They did.
And
They did.
The point is, right, and the point is there's guys on that team that are going to play in the league.
Sure. I would
My
hope.
overall point is I think your Baylor comp is a bad comp because I think there's more talent on that Indiana team than you think.
Well, a couple of Baylor guys did go to the NBA, but they were just basically, role players. But
Fernando
great,
Mendoza is going to be the number 1 pick in the draft,
right?
so I don't think he's going to be a role player.
No, I don't think he's going to be a role player. I also don't think he's going to be a franchise quarterback, but we'll see.
We'll see. I don't know what your issue is with happy-go-lucky Mendoza, but that's your problem, not his. Lee Hunter, a guy from Texas Tech that I love, but unless you talk about best player available, could I see them taking a defensive tackle at 31? You never know with them. He could be a possibility at 31 if he's sitting there. Christian Miller is another guy that potentially could be in play out of Clemson for them. Got to see him play in person. He's impressive, long, athletic. He can two gap, but he can also take gaps. Possibility day 2. The guy that I think is going to get a lot of traction, a couple of guys, Landon Robinson, undersized defensive tackle out of Navy, who I know they like and they've spoken with, and another guy that I think to keep an eye on, who's that stout Kyrus Tonga type. He's a little shorter than Tonga. Dante Corleone, defensive tackle from Cincinnati, is another guy to keep an eye on there. So if they decide that that's an area that they want to address, those are some names to keep an eye on. All right, gents, final thoughts here before we wrap it up, and we'll get into more of the prospects here in the coming weeks, and we'll become one of your key sources to get you ready for the draft. But what do you got here for final thoughts?
I know. I mean, the next few weeks are going to be interesting because there are a lot of prospects here to dive into. I mentioned it earlier in the show. I think there's a lot of position variance this year where there's some positions that are extremely deep and some that are extremely thin, especially at the top of the draft. So I think it's going to be, and this is true every year, but I think more than other years, how the board falls could have a big impact on exactly who the Patriots are picking in the first 2 rounds, more so than what positions and kind of what they feel like they need. So I think it's going to be an interesting draft, maybe a little more unpredictable than some of the previous few years. And of course, the last few years, it was Drake May, it was Will Campbell. We knew that in November both years. But this year, I think it's going to be a little more unpredictable. So I'm looking forward to really starting to dive into it more next week.
Have we ever seen a team that went to the Super Bowl? Yes, they lost, and it was not a close game, but went to the Super Bowl, beat all their competition in the AFC, including Denver on the road. Yes, with the backup quarterback. We've seen a team that went to the Super Bowl, lost, and still looks like it has a lot of needs. Like generally, you look at Super Bowl teams, okay, they got to fine tune things or tweak things. It appears the Patriots still need some players. They have to fill those needs through the draft. They've done a nice job in free agency. It's just something that that you normally don't see, and I guess that's what the NFL is now, because Seattle didn't even make the playoffs the year before, and now they're the Super Bowl champs. We see this all the time, but that to me is pretty interesting to see what happens in the offseason, the remainder of the offseason.
Yeah, well, it's a league of movement, like all pro sports
Yeah.
now, and you can win a Super Bowl. They also got ravaged in free agency.
Mhm.
Lose Kenneth Walker. They lost some guys that were good players for them that they're going to have to replace. And I don't buy Seattle as a long-term contender to begin with. And now you look at the guys they've lost, and John Schneider, one of the best front office executives in the league. All that being said, though, they're going to have some guys that they need to replace. But as far as the Patriots are concerned, yeah, I think we all agree. I also think it speaks to the coaching job that Mike Vrabel and the staff did last year, that they were able to mask some of these things.
Yeah, oh, totally. And the fact that they're bringing back, they announced the coaching staff, like pretty much all those guys from a year ago, I think that's a huge win. And just so
Huge.
not only the quality of Josh McDaniels and Thomas Brown and Zach Core but like just the consistency there, I think for the players, the staff, that's something the Patriots, I mean, the last time they had consistency in a staff was from 2020 to 2021. Like ever since then, they've had turnover all around the staff, including at head coach. So nice to have that consistency. I think that'll benefit not only the staff, but the players as a whole.
I agree. And I think, and I'm going to push back a little bit on one thing Sap said about that they were never in that game. They were in that game. That game was 6-0 for a good amount of time. It was 9-0. This goes back to my criticism of their offensive game plan.
I just said it wasn't that close. I just said it wasn't that close. They were in the game. Yeah, they were down 9-0 at the half.
You were in that game. That game was closer than we think for a good majority of the time. It got away from them in the second half, obviously. But I think a big part of the problem, again, is that offensive game plan. I hate to relitigate the Super Bowl, but if they had a better offensive game plan, if they adjusted better, they could have stolen that Super Bowl. Again, you will never convince me that that was a great Seattle team. I think they were a byproduct of a mediocre league last year. That's the reality of it. They're a Super Bowl champion that survived in a league that had no clear dominant team. So
I'll make a case that the Seattle Seahawks on December 15th, 2025 were the third best team in its own division. I thought the Rams were better, and at that point, the 49ers were hanging 45 on the board on a weekly basis. But then injuries hit San Francisco, and LA had just enough brain cramps that they weren't able to seal the deal. But yeah, by mid-December, I would say Seattle was the third best team in its own division.
So maybe that talent gap that we're talking about might not be as wide as we think with the Patriots, because again, I think, Lyons brings up a good point about, it's going to be a different type of draft this year. It's not going to be what we're used to the last 2 years, where it was a given they were going to take a quarterback at 3 and that they were going to take an offensive tackle at 4 last year. It's a much different mindset. You're picking way down in the first round now. But now we're really going to see what Mike Vrabel, Ryan Cowden, and Wolf are all about. Because I do think, whether it's up or down, I do think ultimately you're going to see a lot of movement by them in this draft. I do think, as much as Wolf comes from that mentality that his father had in those Green Bay front offices about sticking and picking, you got Vrabel and Cowden, who, and Wolf to a degree, was heavily influenced by Belichick as well. But they come from that Belichick school of thought that it's about getting the right players and the best players possible. And if moving around allows you to do that, I think they're going to do it. Gentlemen, great stuff as always. Thank you for taking the time. We appreciate it. Let's do this again next week.
Sounds good. All right.
That'll do it for this week's episode of Patriots Pulse. For WEI's John Lyons. For John Sapochetti, I'm John Sarianides. We will be back with you next week. Until then, have a happy, healthy, and safe week. Peace.